Hi and welcome back to the channel again. Thank you all for tuning in for another video. I have been away for a while and I can only apologise for that. Hopefully I can get back on some sort of schedule and get these videos up every week as well, so every Monday and Friday. That's the kind of aim for my new videos and everything, to be up on a Monday and a Friday, so I'm going to try and stick to that. So is the D3300 still a good camera in 2022? That's what I want to talk about because it does have a special sort of place in my own sort of journey. It was like the first camera I ever used that got me out of the automatic mode. It's the first camera I ever shot like a wedding with, so it does have like a great sort of nostalgic sort of feel to it for myself. Let's look at the camera at face value. This is the D3300. Now I have the 70-200 on this because it's one of my only other lenses, so I kind of have to pair it with something else that's going to look very empty, because it is quite a small body in of itself anyway. This camera came out in 2014, that's 8 years ago. Like that, think about that. 4 cameras, that's quite a while. That's really old in terms of the camera world. 8 years. Like there's obviously like newer models and everything at this point, but what we're going to be focusing on is just this little dinosaur today. It has a 24.2 megapixel sensor, which is a crop sensor or CMOS, opposed to any sort of higher end ones like the one I'm filming on now, which is a full frame sensor. It can take a burst shot of 4.9 photos, so nearly 5 photos a second, which is pretty good if you're looking to get into the sort of sports area of photography as well. It just means that you can hold down the shutter and you can take photos of any sort of fast action, anything like that, without trying to miss a shot. One of the big things is that, like most other cameras, it can shoot RAW, and I'm going to go into that in a whole other video why I think you should constantly shoot RAW, even if you're not sort of equipped to use it yet. But it can shoot RAW, and it is definitely one of the main things I do look for in any cameras. I think at this point now, every camera can shoot some form of RAW, no matter what one it is. On the video side of these, they can shoot up to 1080 at 60 frames a second. I think that's like roughly the same as the one I'm recording on now. And 60 frames at 1080 is what I used to shoot absolutely everything on. That's how I started this whole YouTube. That was on 60 frames at 1080. So it's handy enough, you know, if you wanted to start doing like videos, anything like that there, because 1080 is still a highly decent quality. There is obviously cameras now that are shooting 4K, 8K, give or take. 1080 is still a nice sort of starting point for any sort of camera anyway. Starting off with like my own going on to like my own experience with the camera, it came with the 18-55, which was the stock lens at the time, and it done me for like a lot of different kind of scenarios. It actually done me for my wedding, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Now it does come with that. Now I did very quickly upgrade that to the 50mm, and I think that's something everyone should have in their kit. I actually did make a video about that, and it will pop up on the screen now, so it will. The 18-55 is what this had came with, and for a good while it's all that I was using, because it is an 18, it's a good wide angle lens, and at 55 it's a sort of nice mid-range telephoto lens as well. Like I said, it was the first camera that allowed me to stop shooting in the automatic setting and allowed me to then start shooting within manual mode. I think the camera I had before this was a bridge camera, so there wasn't like a whole lot of options for shooting in manual mode at that point, because you didn't have a lot of control over like certain aspects of the camera. So this was the camera here that allowed me to get out of automatic, and from that it's just been an absolute game changer. Again, I'm going to try and get a wee video up about getting out of the automatic shooting and why it's so important to get out of it. The camera itself does have quite a long battery life, so when I was doing that wedding that I shot on this camera, I think I bought an additional battery, and I think at the end of the night I only went through 1.5 of those batteries, so it can last quite a while if you're looking after your camera at that point. Because it is such a sort of beginner camera as well, there isn't like a whole lot of processing going on, because the file sizes are actually kind of small with it. So because of that there, the battery will last a bit longer than say the likes of a full frame camera, like the one I'm shooting on now. I would suspect that the full frame camera will last a bit less than this one. Now I'm not 100% sure of that, because I don't know the size of the batteries. Obviously this battery here is a bit smaller than that battery in that camera, so I must actually take a wee look at that there and update it as well. Like you see on most professional cameras, there is the command dial on the left hand side, and it controls certain things like what kind of shutter that it's going for, whether that be continuous, single, timed, everything like that. It also has buttons for things like your ISO and everything. So it's a command dial that has shortcuts to certain features. On these ones here, with the command dial here, it is just sort of preset features. So for instance, there is like the effects one, which is kind of fun to mess about with, I'm not going to lie. I have had my fair share of like messing about. The only difference is that with effects, it can only shoot JPEG and never shoots a raw photo. But you do have things like the macro, the sports, the portrait, the night and everything like that, and then obviously your program settings, program shutter, aperture, and the manual priority modes. So that's like the biggest difference there with the command dials as well. If you needed to get access to your ISO, there is ways to do it throughout like the menu system, or for instance, you can map shortcuts to different buttons on your DSLR as well, which is also really handy. The camera does have one function button, so what you can do is remap that for any of your needs. So for instance, the function button will be at the side here above the pop-up flash button here. So the way I done it was I had my function button so that if I held it in and scrolled, it could change my ISO. And it was probably the most handy thing I think I could have mapped it to anyway, because everything else I had full control over. So I had the top one to control my aperture, because we don't have a front dial, so it's kind of a bit more awkward to try and change your shutter on the go. Just for a kind of story time as well about this camera, and I don't recommend this to anybody, but this camera is definitely taken like such a beating, and it's still working like the day I bought it. This thing has been submerged in water, not by choice of course. It has went through snow, it has went through sand, it has went through rain, every sort of element, which is odd because these aren't weather sealed cameras, so any environmental hazards can actually destroy them, but this is still working like the day I bought it. It has been dropped from countertops, but that wasn't overly my fault. That was my dog had actually pulled down like a tea towel that was on the camera, and it smashed off like a tile flooring. But again, it's so robust and it didn't cause any lasting damage to the camera. Again, you wouldn't even know that it had been dropped, submerged in water, anything. The only slight sort of like sign that it has been worn out is the fact that the rubber grip is now coming off, which can be fixed by like any sort of Gorilla Glue or any sort of super glue that you want. But it has definitely taken a beating now, and it's something that I can pride it with. The fact that it actually hasn't smashed it, there's been no repairs sent. This hasn't been sent away for any kind of repairs, so it has definitely taken a beating. It has withstood things it probably shouldn't have withstood, and it's still going like the day I bought it, so I can't fault it for the actual build quality of the camera itself. Because it is a DX camera or crop sensor camera, it does mean that your lenses, you have to be very careful with them, because for instance, a 50mm on this camera over here, the one I'm recording on, is going to be a 50mm. A 50mm on this camera here will be a 75mm. Now, the reason for that is crop sensors have what's called a crop factor. The Nikon has a 1.5, so it turns the 50mm into a 75mm. I think Canon's is 1.8, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that one. You can buy DX lenses, but I don't recommend it, because if you're eventually going to upgrade to a full frame camera, you may as well buy full frame glass. So if you did want a 50mm, you would be better buying something like a 35 and bringing it up to a 50. And then at that point, once you do have a full frame sensor camera, you can then get just a 35mm, and you can then buy a 50mm as well. So that's one thing you do have to be careful for. Now, because of that there, the lower end sort of like DX cameras can be a bit less expensive than full frame cameras, until you start getting up to the sort of more professional crop sensors, like the D3300 would be a beautiful camera for like wildlife. It is a crop sensor, it is a professional crop sensor camera, and it can cost you quite a bit of money. But now for like the sort of downside of the camera, so there isn't a whole lot of them, to be honest. One is the fact that it's not weather sealed, but like I said before, it's been put through every weather imaginable, and it's came out on top of them every single time. The biggest thing that I think I had an issue with is that they didn't have a dual card slot. So as you can see here in this area, there is only room for one SD card, and that's a bit worrying when you're shooting things like a wedding, because you would always want dual card slots. Like for instance, in my camera now, I do have an SD and a CF card in it. The reason for it is of a backup. You can change it to go to overflow as well to get more memory, but I usually use them as backups. In case one card fails, you have the other there, and anytime you shoot a photo, it will write to both. Now, these cameras, or any sort of real entry level camera, won't have those. They will only ever have the one card slot, and it is one of the biggest downsides, because it does mean if you're on a shoot and you're 3 hours into the shoot and all of a sudden your card decides to corrupt on you, there's no sort of way of getting those images back unless you have some sort of recovery software, but at that point it does cost quite a bit of money just to recover photos that may or may not be useful as well. So that was one of the biggest downsides, and it's one of the reasons why I actually upgraded it as soon as I possibly could, and it was to get a dual card slot, so it gives me a bit more sort of peace of mind when I am shooting any kind of wedding or any photo shoot that I'm booked to do. The other thing is that the ISO sensitivity can go up to I think 12,800, but you see at that point there is no point of actually using it because the images are grainy, there's no need for it. I find that these kind of cap out at about 400 and at a push 600. Anything after that I think is too grainy to use and it's just not worth it in the slightest. So the biggest sort of downfall as well is their ISO. So 400 seems to be the max that I would ever push this to, or 600 is an absolute push if I had to. But if I had to push it to 800, I never would, because at that point then there's no point of actually getting the photos, because there's going to be way too much noise and way too much grain on it that the photos will just be unusable at that point. And I knew this firsthand because of the wedding that I did shoot was indoors partly, and I was really pushing this camera to its absolute limits. I had it at I think 400 then 600, but I was also using a flash to try and compensate for any lack of light. But any photos that you take about 800 ISO and try and bring the shadows up or anything like that, you're just going to have really bad, horrible looking noise, and to get rid of it softens the photos. So at that point I don't think there's any point of actually shooting that high. So that is one of the biggest downsides as well. That combined with the no dual card slot, I think are the two main issues of this camera. Overall though, would I recommend it as a beginner camera and even like for a Christmas present? I would say yes, because these cameras now, you could probably get them for about £150 or just slightly above that. The camera is amazing to start out with. If you wanted to get out of automatic shooting, or you just wanted a budget friendly camera. So I do hope that this video has helped in any way. I do hope that you have learned something, and I hope that if you have learned anything, you will give this video a wee thumbs up, and you'll just comment down below what you thought of the video, if there's anything I can improve on or any questions that you have. Until then, I will see you all in the next video, and I hope that you all have a wonderful and fantastic day. Peace.